Member for Nipissing.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, it's interesting today that we have this rush by the Liberal Party and the lack of transparency to the people of Ontario in terms of meeting throughout Ontario, which both the opposition are looking forward to doing. Now, Speaker, let me tell you why this government does not want to stand and speak about these amendments, or why they don't want hearings in other communities. I can tell you, we're talking about hearings in Thunder Bay, Windsor, London, Ottawa. Well, let me tell you what happened when the pre-budget consultations went to Ottawa. We heard from a couple of different groups. I'd like to tell you about these groups because they pertain specifically to pre-budget consultations and why they don't want to hear from groups. Speaker, we heard from a woman, and this is in our Hansard. Her name is Jennifer. She stood in front of the committee. She's an ODSP client. She stood in front of the pre-budget consultation. All three parties were there. Hansard was there. The translators were there. It was a full legislative committee that traveled there to hear from the people of Ontario. And Jennifer stood up. God bless her, Speaker. You know this was the first time she'd ever been into any kind of a hearing such as this. She stood in front of us and said, I have to tell you my story about my hydro bill. She told us that she has to turn off her hydro at 6 every morning till noon every day, shut it off completely, and then turn it on at noon, but shut it off again at 3 every afternoon till 7 o'clock. Speaker, this is before just last Friday, a week ago Friday, when those peak hours, hydro rates increased by 15% for people like Jennifer and for companies throughout Ontario who've now left. So Jennifer stood there and had to tell us, Speaker, that she has to choose between whether to heat or eat. She has to choose between food and fuel. This is the message that we heard, Speaker, when we were on the road in Ottawa. That's the message they don't want you to hear. That's the message. That's exactly why they don't want to take this out to the people of Ontario, because Jennifer will be there again in Ottawa, and Jennifer will say to all of us, I was here only a couple of months ago, the week of January 29th. I was here in front of you, she'll say, and I begged you to do something about hydro. And instead, not only did they not do anything about hydro in the budget, Speaker, May 1st, only a few days ago, she saw her hydro bill go up 15% in the very hours where she has to shut her power off to keep warm in the winter. She wears an extra sweater. That's what Jennifer does. That's what Ontario is reduced to, Speaker. We also heard from Julie Allen, who's the Chief Financial Officer of Fuel Industries. It's unrelated to fuel in this case. This is the digital media fuel that is fueling Ontario, Speaker. And she said, and I'm quoting from Hansard, she's talking about tax credits that's helping fuel her business. It comes to my attention that the OID-MTC, that's the tax credit, Speaker, for the digital media, is under review as one of the tax credits that you're looking at. And I just want to talk a little bit about how I feel it's important to the province and to the interactive digital media. Julie Allen goes on to say the OID-MTC is really a big part of the economic growth of Ontario. There's so much growth potential in the interactive digital media industry. Interactive digital media, the founders are entrepreneurial, high risk-taking, high-growth companies. This is what Julie is saying to the committee. I feel it is something that should be taken into account and focused on because there's so much growth potential. It's also a very young industry and still growing. This sector influences the way we live, we learn, we educate, and we entertain. It also creates very valuable jobs for the province of Ontario. So Julie goes on to describe at our committee We have grown 140% from 2007 to 2014, and this is how long we've been using the Ontario Interactive Digital Media Tax Credit. The support of the program has meant so much to our growth and to our ability to stay in Ontario and continue to evolve. This is the message, Speaker, you hear when you get out and you meet with the people and the businesses in Ontario. She said, I think the OMDC as well is really important to help with global competitiveness. It's necessary to grow this industry, but the interactive digital media has no physical boundaries. We're constantly competing on the global market. 100% of Fuel's revenue is export. We don't have any Canadian sales. All of our time and effort is focused on competing with international companies. Again, there are no physical boundaries with interactive digital media. We need to be competitive. We're competing for labor resources on a global market. We're recruiting resources out of province and out of country to attract skilled labor, highly educated individuals to come to permanent full-time positions. And she ends with saying, I think OID-MTC, the tax credit, is a beneficial program for the province and for the growth of the interactive digital media. The program promotes economic development and is a very young industry that has amazing potential. It also helps Ontario companies be globally competitive in the industry and creates very high-paying skilled jobs in Ontario and keeps our youth here and working. Well, Speaker, they didn't listen. They did not listen to Julie Allen, Chief Financial Officer of Fuel Industries, about the digital media tax credit. They didn't listen to anybody, Speaker, who's in the industry, because the government is reducing support. That's what this budget did, Speaker. It reduced support through narrowing the eligibility for the Ontario Interactive Digital Media Tax Credit, the exact tax credit that Julie spoke of that helped her get started. The second it's gone, Speaker, so are these businesses. We've also seen now changes to the apprenticeship training tax credit, the Ontario Film and Television tax credit. I'm going to read some letters from those folks as well. The Ontario Production Services tax credit, the Ontario Sound Recording tax credit, and the Ontario Computer Animation and Special Effects tax credit. Speaker, the government is cutting that tax credit, and they're doing it immediately, not grandfathering in the businesses who have already started their production here in Toronto, in my community of North Bay and Sudbury, Thunder Bay and the Sioux, the northern communities, who are so blessed to have attracted so many films. Here in downtown Toronto, so many films are underway, so many TV shows are underway. It's amazing, Speaker. What do these guys do? The first cent of good news in a sector, boom! Take that. They're going to save $10 million, according to them. They're going to lose $1 billion, but Speaker, they're going to save themselves $10 million. You talk about that expression, can't see the forest for the trees. Well, we know they can't see the forest, Speaker. That gets us into the Far North Act and the 63 businesses in the forestry sector who are gone. They can't see the forest for the trees. That is the problem, Speaker. That's why they don't want to get out and do these hearings throughout Ontario. When they go to Thunder Bay, Windsor, and London, last time, they heard loudly and clearly from businesses talking about the Ontario Registered Pension Program. Speaker, they heard from these businesses that said, this is going to kill our business. This is the one, Speaker, where the employees and the employers each have to put 1.9%. So the employees' salaries will be reduced by 1.9%. The employer now has to add more money. You know, when we were in London, the business in London said to us, I got to tell you, I got 15 employees today. When this ORPP thing comes through, I'm firing one of them, and I'm going to take their salary, and I'm going to give that money to the employees because they're darn well going to ask for a raise. They can't live with 1.9% less on their salary. They're going to ask for a raise, and I've got to pay their top them up 1.9%. So I'm going to fire one and use that money to pay my share for the other 14, and I'm going to make them work harder. That's what we heard when we were in London, Speaker. That's exactly why these guys do not want to get out there back into Ontario. I can't imagine what kind of armor they're going to have to wear to get out there and face the Jennifers of the world who can't afford to heat or eat. Speaker, this is exactly what we heard. In fact, you know, we talked about the fact, Speaker, that their own document that was written by the Ministry of Finance, it's called Confidential Advice to Cabinet. This is under that subheadline, not recommended. I mean, Speaker, this is exactly what they told the Premier will happen. Any increase in taxes would have a negative long-run macroeconomic impact on GDP and employment. That payroll tax would have the largest negative impact on employment. That's what the Ministry of Finance told the Premier. And that's exactly what all these businesses, including the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and private businesses who came, but not just businesses, Speaker, charities, people like the YMCA, those types of groups also. They all have to pay the ORPP. They have no idea where they're going to get the money, and they're the very people who are saying, we're going to have to let somebody go to pay this money. The Ministry of Finance told the Premier that this payroll tax will cost 18,000 jobs, lost jobs in Ontario, for every $2 billion that is raised. Speaker, that is exactly the punishment that will be inflicted on these businesses. Now, did they listen? Nope. They went ahead a week ago, passed the ORPP, patted themselves on the back. Last week it received royal assent, and Speaker, the businesses are speaking loudly and clearly already, right across Ontario. You know, we've got 2,700 fewer businesses last year in Ontario than were there the year before. This is the kind of discussion that they don't want to have by going to Thunder Bay and Windsor and Ottawa and London, because we heard loudly and very clearly, Speaker, from all these businesses. You know, I'll read you another letter from one of the employees of one of these people in the film industry that this government is punishing, and we are going to see immediately hundreds and very shortly thousands of jobs lost, Speaker, because these jobs are very, very mobile. It's mobile, Speaker. As a citizen of Ontario and an employee working in the film industry in visual effects, I am writing to you to express my concerns with the proposed changes. The film industry makes money for Ontario. The guy in the film industry understands that. Speaker, they don't. We generate millions of dollars of revenue for the province through income tax of staffers working in the industry and through supporting local businesses. Think about the hotels, think about the restaurants, think about all these businesses in downtown Toronto, think about the businesses in Powassan where I attended, where they were filming a movie recently. Mattawa filmed 2. Mattawa, small community in my riding, had 2 major movies, one for Hallmark. You know, when you think of the stars that come up to Mattawa and Powassan and downtown North Bay, who've been in and out of there in the last year, and in Sudbury, and in Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay. Kiss all that goodbye, Speaker, because under the current tax credit system, film production and visual effects services, their spend has almost doubled in the last decade. Well, Speaker, these guys, you know, as soon as they see somebody succeeding and spending money and bringing tax revenue, first thing they want to do, cut the tap off, cut the industry. No. They don't want to generate all these billions of dollars in revenue in Ontario, Speaker. They're ready. They want to save $10 million. I remember the last time they saved money, Speaker. Of course, very tragically, we heard about their winter road maintenance. They wanted to save $36 million. And, you know, Speaker, there are priorities and there are choices to make. And so one of their choices was to knowingly and purposely cut back on winter road maintenance, Speaker, and it resulted in deaths throughout all of Ontario. I tell you, Speaker, how much it hurt and how much it pained me over that Christmas period. December 27th of 2011 to January 3rd, Speaker, that period, 10 people under the age of 20 died. 8 of them were teenagers. One was 8 years old, Speaker. This is what happens when you did the cuts that they did to winter road maintenance. The Auditor General told us that. It wasn't about the privatization. It worked well for 9 years. It's since these guys came in 2009 and changed the rules and took away the oversight, Speaker. That's the $36 million they saved. That's their idea about savings. And we saw the result. Now they're going to crush an industry, Speaker, an industry that generates billions of dollars. They're going to crush that industry to try to save $10 million. I don't even know if they can save that. We don't believe any of the numbers they've presented to us, Speaker. I have no idea how they imagine they're going to save $10 million. And why we don't have any credibility in the numbers, Speaker, I've spoken about my favorite chart of all time, Speaker. My absolute favorite chart. Here it is in Building Ontario Up, Budget 2015. It's what I've referred to, Speaker, many times in this legislature as the fake chart. This tells you why people of Ontario do not believe any of your numbers. Page 199 of the budget. Here's the fake chart, Speaker, the one that we showed in the legislature many times.
Yeah. I appreciate that the member wants to make reference to the budget, but he can't use it as a prop. So I return to the member for Nipissing.
Thank you, Speaker. When I saw the minister use it so many times, I presumed you were allowed to do that in the House. I apologize. I did not know that. So this chart, Speaker, let me tell you about the chart in the Ministry of Finance's own words, why I call this the fake chart. In my copy of Fedeli on Focus on Finance, which you can download at fedeli.com, my shameless plug again, let me read you from page 14 and 15 where I put the fake chart in here and reference the fake chart, Speaker. The wording goes on, and I'll have to use it carefully because I know I had to withdraw 2 words the last time I read this. I remember the words now, and we'll make sure I don't use those 2 words. In fact, the Ministry of Finance admits the benchmark of progress, an estimated $24.7 billion deficit, is a complete fiction. Quote, was never a real expectation and was a deliberate policy, Speaker, to project a worst-case outcome. So in other words, what we saw in the chart is not real, Speaker. They also admit, quote, the path to balance was then drawn from there, assuming a straight-line trajectory of declining deficits. What it's saying, Speaker, is they have a chart that they start out with a fake number, $24.7 billion. They want to get to 0, so they draw an absolute straight line and then fill in the lines down, and that's going to be their deficit number for the year. Every one of those numbers was made up, absolutely and completely made up. In fact, they go on to say, it was assumed that spending would be constrained to whatever it takes to hit these targets. That's what they said. We drew these imaginary lines, and wherever the line went across, that was going to be our budget number. I mean, I don't know about, throwing a dart at a chart on a wall could have been even more accurate than this, Speaker. And then they go on to say, essentially, someone laid a ruler across a graph, drew a straight line, and that's the extent of the government's plan to balance the budget. So you wonder why we don't believe any of the numbers we get from these guys. So they also divulge, quote, over the medium term, we have notional targets by sector that add up to the deficit numbers, but not yet full plans to deliver on them. It means, Speaker, we know what the number is going to be. We have a notional target. We think it's going to be, of course, they were wrong. They went from a deficit of $9.2 billion. They didn't even match their own fake chart. They went from $9.2 billion. It got bigger to $10.5 billion. Got bigger to $10.9 billion. Went the wrong way, Speaker. They couldn't even meet their own fake numbers here, Speaker. But they have not yet plans to deliver on. And for the extended outlook, Speaker, neither sector targets nor plans exist yet. That's an exact quote from the Ministry of Finance. The once secret documents that we got through the gas plant scandal concluded, quote, in order to hit the deficit targets, spending growth going forward has to decrease dramatically. But as we've seen, Speaker, that restraint never materialized. Budget has $2.4 billion in increased spending, Speaker. So we've got a fake chart, fake numbers, and we've got a government who will not go back out to the people because they sure as heck did not like what they heard from them last night. They did not like hearing from the film and digital and apprentice groups, all three who spoke very clearly. They knew it was coming. They heard the rumblings from this government that their lifeblood for their very industries was about to be cut. They knew it was coming. They warned us. They warned everybody in the committee, and yet this government went ahead, despite all of the advice, the good advice that they got from people, they went ahead, rammed through this budget. We've got, you know, they're time allocating everything, Speaker. They do not want debate in this legislature on any of our issues, Speaker. They do not want to hear from the people. They do not want to hear from the legislators, the lawmakers. They don't want to hear from anybody. It's because they may have a differing opinion. They don't pay attention to our own slogan in here about hearing the other side. Speaker, they don't want to hear the other side. This budget was made a long, long time ago. When we saw the budget binder, Speaker, it's about 4 inches thick. You know, the budget was read on a Thursday, and Friday the budget binder was out with details about the sections in the Act. The whole thing with the Ed Clark committee and the report, a facade, Speaker. The details on how to convert that into the laws was all done, section after section after section after section, stripping away all the powers of the Integrity Commissioner, taking away the powers of the Auditor General, taking away the Sunshine List, taking away the Financial Accountability Officer. Speaker, taking hydro the moment one share is sold, taking hydro away from the Crown agency status. All that was already done, and they're pretending it got done within days, hours if not, from the time that the budget was passed. I mean, what a pile of nonsense, Speaker. That's just absolutely, you know. They talk to us about this $130 billion in infrastructure, Speaker, which is nothing more than a re-announcement. And if you want further proof of that, Speaker, you know, let me, you know, when you look at last year's budget, 2014, which I won't hold up as a prop, but I'll read from it, dedicating proceeds from 7.5 cents of the existing provincial gasoline tax for public transport, transit and transportation, etc., etc., etc. The new one, page 44, dedicating proceeds from 7.5 cents of the existing provincial gasoline tax. Again and again. Same words. It's, Speaker, they did nothing but a cut and paste over the budget here. The same announcement made it sound like it's all brand new, all new, big information. None of it, Speaker, but there's one tricky little part of this $130 billion announcement that is new. In last year's budget, 2014, they talk about, Speaker, that they needed $3.1 billion of asset sales to make it happen. $1.1 billion this year, $1 billion the next, $500 million the year after, and $500 million the year after. They talked about it being the GM shares, the sale of LCBO warehousing, the sale of the OPG building. All that was accounted for in the $3.1 billion, Speaker. But now this year, in the budget, all of a sudden they need to sell Hydro One in order to make their plan. So they're talking about selling Hydro One, putting a portion of the money against the debt of Hydro One, which of course if you don't, and they changed the law to make that happen because it was against the law to do it. So Speaker, they do that, and sadly that is going to raise your hydro bill because you've still got the mortgage, so it's like you sold the house and took the cash and bought a car with it instead of paying off the bank. That's exactly what they're doing. So the bank loan, the mortgage on hydro is still owed, Speaker, so it's got to come from somewhere. It's going to come out of your pocket, Speaker. It's going to come out of the people. It's going to come out of Jennifer's pocket in Ottawa, which is why they don't want to go to Ottawa and have to face her yet again. So, Speaker, here we are now. They're telling us that they're going to take the other part of that hydro sale and put it into transit. Well, Speaker, that is absolute sheer nonsense. According to their own budget, that money was already budgeted. So they can ostensibly say they're putting it into transit, pat themselves on the back again, but then all they do is haul out the money that was already there, Speaker, and bail themselves out of their awful deficit that went from $9.2 billion to $10.5 billion to $10.9 billion. That's what they're doing, Speaker. It's a shell game with our money. That's exactly what they're doing, Speaker. Their own budget tells us they only needed $3.1 billion to make it work last year, and now this year, Speaker, they're going all in. They're taking the 3.1 plus they need the sale of hydro. Speaker, that does not fix the overspending problem that they have. The problem is not a revenue problem in Ontario. They have a spending problem. They cannot help themselves from continuing to spend, spend, spend. It's a tax and spend, Speaker. They tax you and spend your money, Speaker. That's exactly what they're doing. So now they've got this extra money that came from the sale of an asset. They didn't fix the core problem, what we call the structural deficit. It's still there, Speaker. The expense is still there. When you sell that asset this year, what are you going to do next year? What are you going to sell at that volume next year to eliminate your deficit if you haven't solved the core problem? Speaker, these guys have not found a tax they don't like. I've told this story a couple of times, and it boggles my mind, Speaker. Here's an example of the sort of tax and spend that they're all about. Here you've got a company, one of the very few left exploring in Northern Ontario after the Far North Act got forced through by these guys, and you've got a company that found diamonds, the only company in Ontario that found diamonds. So they begin to go into the construction of the mine. Now, De Beers has already spent millions on getting that mine up and running. It's not quite running at the time. These guys knock at the door and tell them, congratulations, welcome to Ontario. Guess what? We're putting in a diamond tax today. Can you imagine, Speaker? But they said, oh, don't worry, we're going to tax every diamond producer in Ontario. Of course, there's only the one, and there will only ever be the one. So, Speaker, this is what they're all about. They will tax anything that doesn't move, and some things that do, and spend your money. You know, when I think of the Ring of Fire, Speaker, the place in the far north where I've been to 4 times, and I saw the hundreds of people in 2011, 2012, 2013 working there, more than 250 people. When I was there in 2014, you know what happened, Speaker? Cliffs Resources was moving out that day. I watched as they packed up their boxes. Now, not only did they move out of the Ring of Fire, they ended up moving out of Ontario. They ended up not only selling their base camp, Speaker, they sold their claim. They've given up on Ontario. Why? Because these guys can't put 2 and 2 together. They could not put the deal together. Chromite, the mineral that makes stainless steel, was discovered there 8 years ago now, and there's still nothing there after 8 years because these guys can't put it together. And you know what the mining companies have told me? In my office, when they come in for stakeholder meetings to talk about, Vic, we need everything you can do to help us with the Ring of Fire, they say, you know what, one of the things that worries us? That diamond tax they did to De Beers after they were in for billions, they're going to do that to us. They're going to bring a chromite tax. I know the member from Parry Sound stood in this legislature and asked that very question, did not get a no from this government. They would not say no when asked if you are going to implement a chromite tax once these companies are halfway through. Speaker, this is exactly what this government is all about. They do not want to get out there throughout Ontario and travel and confront, and that's what it will be, confront Jennifer, who has to decide between heat or eat, food and fuel. They do not want to confront all of the film industry, Speaker. That's why they will not travel.
Good job, Victor. Well done.